Is the Scout Bobber a good bike for a beginner? Check that out. I've seen so many beginners start off on the Scout Bobber and be totally fine. And maybe you're in a position where you can financially afford a more expensive motorcycle. I don't know. It all depends on the person. But would I recommend the Scout Bobber for everyone?
Is the Scout Bobber a good bike for beginners? That's the question we're going to try to answer today. The Scout Bobber is one of Indian Motorcycle's most popular motorcycles, arguably one of the best looking bobbers out on the market right now. But is the Scout Bobber good for beginners, or does it pose some challenges that might be too overwhelming for a beginner? If you look online, you'll see an array of answers. You'll see quite a number of people that support the decision to make the Scout Bobber a beginner's first motorcycle, from those that have actually lived that experience themselves or more experienced riders giving them their opinion. Of course, you'll have others on the opposite end of the spectrum as well, for the obvious reason that it's an expensive bike in case you're to damage the bike in an accident, or the power is just too much for a new rider. I also did a search on YouTube, and there's a bunch of Scout Bobber owners that have made content about their experience with the Scout Bobber as a first bike and how it's an excellent platform for a beginner. I wanted to dive a bit further, so I hit up Ricky Bobber. He hails from San Diego, and he has a YouTube channel centered around the Scout Bobber content. Here's what he had to say.
So the Scout Bobber is fast, but what makes it great for new riders is a few things. Mainly its power delivery. I'm talking about the twist of the wrist that's converted into torque in the back wheel. To reach the top speeds, it has to be very intentional. Some bikes go from 0 to 10 instantly. That would be considered a horrible beginner bike. Whereas the Scout Bobber takes a few seconds to get to 0 to 3, and then 4 to 10 really quickly after that. This thing hauls about the same as some of the other heavier bikes with a bigger displacement, even the Indian motorcycle line. One is its very low profile and center of gravity, which make it much easier to keep from laying down at any speed. The last thing about the Indian Scout Bobber is that if you decide it's not for you, there's loads of people looking for these pre-owned. It definitely keeps its value, should you choose to part with it for any reason.
So there you have it. Or do we? Ricky does bring up a lot of good points. The Bobber is a great motorcycle for a beginner for all the reasons he just mentioned. Great power so that the bike grows with you, and great resale value if you ever decide that you've outgrown it. Easy to manage because of low center of gravity and low seat height. I don't think there's much to argue with here. Ricky Bobber is one of several, if not hundreds, myself included, motovloggers on YouTube that have nothing but positive things to say about the Scout Bobber as a beginner motorcycle. But maybe there's a bit of post-purchase rationalization happening here. It's a tendency to remember your choice as better than they actually were. In this respect, people tend to over-attribute positive features to options they chose and negative features to options not chosen. Because let's face it, the Scout Bobber is really expensive. The Scout Bobber brand new is about $13K MSRP, most likely $15 to $16K out the door. At that price point, the Scout Bobber would be considered a luxury item that not many can afford. So I decided to ask my Instagram community their thoughts on the Scout Bobber as a beginner motorcycle. I had about 300 plus responses, and about half agree that the Scout Bobber was actually a good motorcycle for a beginner. Okay, so we're off to a good start. And then you actually had a small percentage that said no. But the surprising thing here is that almost half said it depends on other variables. So that got me thinking, it really does depend on other factors, doesn't it? Your disposable income, your maturity level, and your self-awareness, or general stage of life, or maybe your size and height in relationship to how well you can handle or manage the weight of the motorcycle. All that to say, maybe, just maybe, we're asking the wrong question. Maybe the question should begin with, what makes a good beginner motorcycle? So I called up my friend Tim at Nevermore Moto to get his take.
So part of what spurred this idea for me to make this video about the Scout Bobber is that I actually had a comment not related to the Scout Bobber, but actually the Kawasaki Vulcan video that I made. And then somebody made the comment that they think that the Vulcan is a dumb choice for a beginner because it has 60-ish plus horsepower and that is too much for a beginner. And I was like, what? It kind of dawned on me that, you know, people have different tolerances and people have different ideas about what a good beginner bike looks like. Part of the discussion today about the Scout Bobber, it has to really include what we think a definition of a good beginner motorcycle is. So for example, some people might say a good beginner motorcycle is one that has very little power, low seat height or lightweight, whatever that looks like, that's going to define what a good beginner motorcycle is for them. I don't know, it really depends on how you define it. I think a good beginner motorcycle is one that is manageable in terms of the power band. No matter how much power it has, you know, as long as that power band is manageable, I think it could be a really good beginner motorcycle. I think more power isn't necessarily a bad thing because, again, going back to how you define a good beginner motorcycle may be different. Part of what makes a good beginner motorcycle, I think, is one that can grow with you, right? Some people actually prioritize that because they don't want to go through 3 or 4 different motorcycles to actually find the one that you want. If you really want something that'll grow with you in the long run, but you're also responsible to a certain degree, and you can manage self-control, I would say the Scout Bobber is an excellent beginner motorcycle. So the other aspect that I think makes the Indian Scout Bobber a really good beginner motorcycle is, you know, the value. On the used market, you know, the Scout Bobber doesn't drop a whole lot in price. That's been my experience. When I was looking for an Indian Scout Bobber in the used market, it was hard to come by. Most people who buy an Indian Scout Bobber tend to stick with it. At least in my area, I don't see a whole ton. I had to drive all the way to Pennsylvania to get this guy. And in case, you know, you decide that the Indian Scout Bobber isn't for you, you'll get a lot of your money back. Because when you're thinking about motorcycles, you know, you may not make the right decision on the first get-go. So you want to make sure you get a motorcycle that retains its value. I have a buddy who actually started out on an Iron 1200, and within, I think, maybe a month or 2, he got into a Lowrider S, and he was completely fine. I was actually surprised that literally within 2 months, he was on a Lowrider S. So there are people that will say to beginner motorcycle riders, like, dude, just buy the bike that you really want, because that's the one that you're eventually going to end on. And so you don't want to go through all of these in-between bikes. So if you think about, like, in a matrix decision, right, you got the x-axis and the y-axis. So on the x-axis, let's say you have like power or the fun aspect of riding a motorcycle. On one end of the spectrum, you're going to have a lot of power, which is probably going to be more fun. But on the other end of the spectrum, you're going to have very little power. Like, let's say an Indian Scout Bobber versus a Rebel 300. And on the y-axis, you might have maybe price. So maybe you prioritize an affordable motorcycle versus a really expensive motorcycle. In the fun aspect of things, like, this is a really fun bike. Very easy to dip into the corners. It's got a lot of power. It's going to keep you satisfied in terms of that department for a really long time. That's what I think. Another reason why I think the Scout Bobber could be a good beginner motorcycle, it has a really low seat height. It is very approachable in that sense. I know that as a beginner, for me, being able to put my feet on the ground was something that was confidence inducing. And so I think for most riders, I would say they can put their feet down on the Scout Bobber. The other aspect that I would add to this is that this is a really well-balanced bike. Really well-balanced bike. Low to the ground, low center of gravity, so it's super easy to manage. Even though it is about 500 pounds, it's not that hard to manage, you know, when you're riding. We're gonna take a quick break. We're gonna go into Hallmark and pick up something real quick. All right, so we got what we needed. Check that out. It's an Indian Scout Bobber little ornament for your Christmas tree. Pretty cool. If you want one of these, head over to your local Hallmark store. Where's my bike? Where is my motorcycle? So going back to, it is all how you define it. It is how you personally define what you think a good beginner motorcycle is and what that looks like. That's going to be for you to judge. I can't tell you that. Nobody else can tell you that. I mean, maybe you're working within a certain price range and that defines what a good beginner motorcycle is. Maybe it's a used one, something that's reliable, something that can get you into the daily grind of like going to work, coming back, you know, something that you can beat on, which at that point, maybe that is like a Rebel or something like that. Maybe it's a Yamaha. So all I'm saying is the question of, is the Indian Scout Bobber a really good beginner motorcycle? It's hard to answer, but if I had to give an answer, of course my answer would be yes. Go ahead and buy one. Try it out. Try out for yourself. A good beginner motorcycle is something that, you know, you absolutely love, right? Something that you just can't get enough of. When you open your garage or whatever and you see your motorcycle, you're just in love all over again, and you have a lot of fun riding it, and you feel like it's challenging you, right? I think that's a good beginner motorcycle, to be honest. But not everyone may define it the same way. For me, I got into motorcycling because I want to look cool and I want to have a lot of fun. Those two things are probably my priorities when it comes to motorcycling, at least. I think the Scout Bobber helps me do that. It's a cool ass looking motorcycle and it's a ton of fun to ride. As you can see, the sun is setting, so it's about time for me to say goodbye. So I'm gonna bounce out of here, guys. Thank you for tuning into this video. If the Indian Scout Bobber appeals to you in any form or fashion, just give it a try. Once you try it out, I think then you'll be able to answer the question, is the Indian Scout Bobber a good beginner motorcycle based on how you're defining it. I'll see you on the next video. Peace.